Without further ado, it's time to welcome on our friend Charlie Potter. Does an outstanding job covering the Alabama Crimson Tide. Yes, the Alabama Crimson Tide for BamaOnline.com. Chopping Charlie Potter after the Braves take care of business on a Thursday night of all things, Charlie. Last week we kind of changed it around. We said we're going to start looking at the Friday games after you're on, more so than looking at the Thursday games because it becomes such a train wreck with those games. But even the Braves on Thursday now winning since we changed our mindset, Charlie, changed our narrative with you.
Yeah, I mean it's great to see it shift. The baby Braves getting it done. It was good to see Austin Riley come up in the big leagues, and there's a reason that he was called up. I know it had to do a lot with injury, but I don't see him going away anytime soon. I was watching his debut, and he played great, but Mike Soroka, the pitcher, even better. And I like to see these young guys do well. It's really good for the future of the Braves.
It is. You said it, the baby Braves. I mean, this is a team with a bunch of, 22, 21, 20-year-olds that, looking like they've got a core to not only contend in the National League East for years to come, but maybe similar to what we saw with Bobby Cox and Chipper Jones and Glavine and Maddox and Smoltz. What are you thinking here, Charlie? You thinking a decade plus of at least relevancy, if nothing else?
Yeah, I would love that. I know we've talked before about how they've locked up some of the young guys you saw. The deal for Ronald Acuna, Ozzie Albies. You see these new young guys that are playing really well. Yeah, I would think so. When your veteran on the team is Freddie Freeman, it seems like he's still, at least in my eyes, a young pup when it comes to stars in the major leagues, and he's kind of the cornerstone. But then you add those young pieces like those two with Ronald and Ozzie. You got Dansby Swanson. This Austin Riley who's coming on, a couple of young pitchers who are doing well. So yeah, the future's bright. And you look, what are they now? A game and a half back from the Phillies. Bryce Harper isn't playing well at all. So they can make a little move here. They've won 2 in a row. They won the series over the Cardinals. So it's all good to talk some positive Braves stuff with you on a Friday, Travis.
We're even bringing Charlie on with the tomahawk chop chant there now. I mean, that's how things have changed wildly, Charlie, in a week with you. The Potter curse. We're officially burying it in the backyard out here outside Studio T. Hey, Charlie, something else we're not very far removed from is the arrival of the remainder of Alabama's 2019 football signing class. And we talked about this on the Built by Bama Online podcast here in the last day or so. But after what we saw in spring practice and how impactful a lot of those 15 guys were, just in spring drills anyway, it's kind of crazy to think that there's still, 10, 12 more on the way. And in that group, there's more than a few that could make a big impact. And Alabama probably needs some of these guys to make a big impact in 2019, right?
Yeah, no doubt. There are a dozen recruits that will get on campus in 10 days on the 27th. At least that's the move-in date that most of them have told me. I've talked to a few of them this week. Hope to get some more next week, and just doing some features on them before they get to campus to kind of see their excitement level and their goals for their first season. But a lot of them have been talking about early playing time and contributing right away and helping the team, whether it's from an aspect of first-team reps or just providing depth. And there are positions where Alabama needs some of that depth. We've talked at length about at the running back position how Nick Saban left the door open for one of these 2 freshmen coming in to maybe seize that number 3 role behind Najee Harris and Brian Robinson. You have Trey Sanders, the nation's number 1 running back, coming in, and Keelan Robinson. I know he's dealt with an injury, but those guys, it's been left open for them to contribute right away. You look at Alabama signed 6 defensive linemen, and 3 of them were there in the spring. 3 of them are coming in the summer, and I think they're going to have some opportunities to provide some depth there and maybe claim a rotation spot. You have 4 of the 5 defensive back signees coming in. I talked to DeMarco Helms, the safety, yesterday, and put a story up on BOL this morning. And, he's a guy that's really looking to come in and compete for early playing time. And safety is the spot where Nick Saban even said depth is a concern. You just go down the list. Obviously, they're going to have a couple linebackers come in, and Christian Harris is a guy that can provide depth at inside linebacker. You're going to have your lone tight end Sonny and Jaleel Billingsley, who's going to be coming in at a position that wasn't very deep in the spring. So, yeah, there are plenty of guys that are going to have opportunities once they get on campus. And I know a lot of people point to the early enrollees and how beneficial that is for them to get on campus, but we've seen a lot of guys that don't enroll early come in and make an immediate impact. I mean, just last year, look at what Patrick Surtain and Jalen Waddle were able to do. Those guys didn't get here in the spring, and they were able to come in and essentially start right away. So, yeah, plenty of opportunities for these guys. I know Alabama's looking forward to getting these 12 guys on campus here pretty soon.
Charlie, what about a guy that was here in the spring that maybe, not to say was a disappointment, because the expectation for these early enrollees, even now, even in an era where there are so many 3-and-outs and these guys are being counted upon more and more earlier and earlier in their Alabama careers, maybe a guy or two in the spring that wasn't DJ Dale, that showed up with the first team defense by the end of spring drills, that you sort of expect could make that sort of move between the end of spring and the end of fall camp that will really benefit, in other words, from, a full run through the fourth quarter program and, the voluntary drills that this team will go through in the coming months. You got a guy or two that you think maybe fits that bill?
Yeah, I mean, at the top of the list, it almost seems like a cop-out because we heard so much about Antonio Alfano going into the spring and didn't really hear much about him during it. I know he dealt with a little bit of an injury. I think he had a concussion in the spring, and that's going to set you back a little bit. And, the story of the spring in terms of freshmen, at least on the defensive side of the ball, was about DJ Dale and his surge up to the first team and taking reps between Raekwon Davis and LeBron Ray. But I think, the coaches are still really high on Antonio. You saw and heard every time we were at practice, Brian Byrne, the new defensive line coach was all over Antonio and trying to get him to do things perfectly. And I think that's not just getting on to a young guy and making him do things the right way, but because they know they can need him and use him in a rotational role. So I think Antonio, for someone that maybe didn't flash as much in the spring, could come on in the summer now that he's going to be healthy and in fall camp and make a big impact. But you go down the list, a lot of these guys did a lot of good things in the spring. I think Evan Neal impressed, Shane Lee. We saw what DJ Dale and John Mechie did. They were kind of the stars of the spring, but maybe someone on the offensive line. We've talked a lot about the interior, and you and I were talking about it a lot during the A-Day game, how with the twos, we were kind of shocked at how much we saw the young guys and how consistent those young guys were when they started moving people around. In the interior, we saw Evan Neal at left guard, Darian Dalcourt at center, and Pierce Quick at right guard. So I think one of those two guys, or one of those three guys, if not more, can maybe make a move. I'm not saying they're going to start, but get that meaningful playing time as a reserve, maybe one of the first guys off the bench, and be someone that offensive line feels comfortable throwing in the mix with the veterans they're going to have coming back. So, I think a lot of these guys could benefit from the summer they have coming up, whether it's conditioning, 7-on-7s, and then obviously fall camp will be right around the corner. So they're going to get even more time on the field.
As a part of these early expectations for so many of these guys now, the sin that we continue to commit is to overlook guys who maybe don't make that type of impact in their first year, and then how they can be impactful in year two. In other words, guys that aren't Patrick Surtain, guys that aren't Jalen Waddle from last season. With that, some second-year guys, Charlie, for this Alabama team that maybe you're hearing really good things about that weren't prominent players for the team a year ago, and as we look ahead to the upcoming season.
Yeah, and there are a few. I think one of the more intriguing ones for me, he might not be necessarily at the top of the list, but I think to see what happens with Cameron Latu is really interesting. I think he showed some good things at outside linebacker last year, but we saw the guy move to tight end because we have already mentioned how tight end was a thin group for Alabama in the spring. And, Latu did some really good things, and he made his way up to working with the ones. I know Alabama was dealing with some injuries at the position, guys like Major Tennyson and Kedrick James were on the field all the time, but he certainly took advantage of what is usually just an experiment in the spring, and I'm really intrigued to see if that continues in fall camp and what progress he makes in a new position. You look across the board at other redshirt freshmen, and I think one that's going to make one of the biggest impacts if the offensive line stays the same is Emil Ekiyor. And, we saw him work at left guard and maybe move around a little bit because Alabama has some options. We're probably going to see Deontay Brown miss some of the games to start the season, and we have some inexperience there maybe on the left side with him and Chris Owens, but I think Emil has put himself in a position to really go out there, seize the starting role, and make an impact in his second year after redshirting. So, yeah, he's a guy that I think could definitely make an impact.
Big weekend for different reasons, Charlie, for the Alabama baseball and softball teams. Alabama baseball, as we know, loses 9-4 last night over at Foley Field on the University of Georgia campus against a really good Georgia team. Your expectations going into these next couple of days? As I understand it, Alabama needs to win one more game than Kentucky does, essentially, in these next 2 days to qualify for the SEC tournament. Alabama has the head-to-head tiebreaker on South Carolina, but looking at Kentucky in that three-way tie, it's not as favorable. What do you think? I mean, is there any way to try to figure out how these next 2 days are going to go from that standpoint?
It's tough. Keeping up to this tiebreaker is a headache too. But the good news is, and it makes life easy for me because there's not much math involved, is all three teams lost last night. And it's going to be a tough challenge for all three of them because Alabama's obviously playing at Georgia, and Georgia's the number 6 team in the country. You look at the rest of it, and Kentucky's at Vandy, and they lost by a touchdown. You look at South Carolina; they're at Mississippi State, and they gave up 24 runs last night. So it's a tough challenge for all three of those teams. But Alabama's going to have some opportunities these next 2 days. Brock Love is pitching tonight. He's a guy that last weekend against Texas A&M was really good, and they're going to be able to pitch Sam Finnerty on Saturday. And it's a tough road to hoe just because Georgia's a talented team, but Alabama's going to have some opportunities. They're going to obviously have to wake the bats up a little bit and put some offense behind these pitchers and what they can do. But if Alabama goes out and wins the game against Georgia, because of the level of competition that Kentucky and South Carolina are facing and the challenges they're facing, I think that could do it. But if Alabama and South Carolina win, then I think Alabama's in. If South Carolina and Kentucky win, and then Alabama doesn't get a win this weekend, then they're probably on the outside looking in. So, it's an interesting weekend to follow just because you have three teams battling for that last spot. Earlier in the season, we thought that it could be, Missouri was going to be on the outside looking in because of the postseason ban, but they appealed, and as long as that's going on, they're going to be able to compete. So, 3-team race here at the end, and that always makes things exciting, that's for sure.
And as you outlined there or alluded to, the tiebreakers are hard to figure out because the pecking order for a three-way tie at the top of the standings is still up in the air. To base it on the record of these teams against the top team in the league overall or the second, you have to go down that list, and there's still a race for that regular season SEC championship. Charlie, I guess from a softball standpoint, death taxes and Patrick Murphy's program hosting a regional, right?
Yeah, talk about consistency. And I know they're motivated. We saw on the selection show that, they got the number 8 overall seed, and, I think some people thought they might get a top 5 seed, myself included, and they used that as motivation. They were picked to finish 8th in the league this year, and they won the regular season title outright and, played Florida for the championship and just narrowly lost. So, I think, Murph and the girls are motivated, and, they'll kick off their season out, I'm sure, in a big way. And, I like that they're being honest about that and how motivated they are. Saying quotes like, you don't want to anger an elephant or something like that. It's always good and refreshing to see them come out and be honest like that. And And they are. I mean, they deserve maybe a little bit better, and we'll see how things go. But yeah, it's the picture consistency over there at Rhodes House, and Patrick Murphy's at the front of all of that.
Yeah, reserve seating sold out very quickly within a day for this regional. There's still general admission tickets available if you want to make it over to Rhodes Stadium this weekend. Well, Charlie, all the pressure on you is tonight with the Milwaukee Brewers at SunTrust Park taking on our Atlanta Braves. So we'll look to revisit on that. It was a celebratory visit with Charlie Potter this week. We'll see how it goes next week. Hey, have a great weekend, Charlie.
All right, man. Thanks for having me.
There he goes, chopping Charlie Potter.